Until very recently, I truly believed that Rogal Dorn was dead in the lore, like straight up Kamehameha'd into oblivion, with just his hand remaining. But as Perturabo is returning, and the lore is moving forward, I wanted to check one more time whether Dorn is actually dead or not. Only for me to realize that for the last 2 decades, nearly everybody has been misreading the lore, including me. And sadly, been believing the straight up wrong Lexicanum lore. Now, I don't want to rag on the 40k lore wikis, but dear god, we need to fix this. So, in today's video, we are going to take a look at the actual sources and inconsistencies in the lore that both the 40k tubers and the Lexicanum get wrong. There is a lot more nuance to Dorn's lore than most people believe, and let me tell you, his death has a 95% chance of being a full-on red herring, with actual sources backing that up. So let's get into it. Is Rogal Dorn actually dead? Or can he return next edition to stop the onslaught of the returned demon Perturabo? As per usual, all sources used will be shown in the bottom left hand corner throughout this video, in case you want to check the sources I have used, or just want to learn more about the mysterious circumstances of Rogal Dorn's disappearance. All that and a whole lot more in today's video. Alright, let's get into the lore. The Great Crusade and the enlightenment it brought to the galaxy were spearheaded by the Sons of the Emperor. It was an era unlike any other, for there was no foe who could truly stand against the might of the Legiones Astartes. Among them, Rogal Dorn had earned a resentment of some of his brothers for how close he was to the Emperor, yet most held him in high esteem. That is with one notable exception. On Shravan, Horus Lupercal, Fulgrim and Rogal Dorn were celebrating Perturabo during a victory feast. The Iron Warriors had brought a great victory with their siegecraft, and thus Horus proclaimed Perturabo the greatest master of siege warfare. Fulgrim then turned to Rogal Dorn to ask if he thought the Imperial Palace could resist the Iron Warriors. Dorn thought for a long moment, and then proclaimed that if the palace was well manned, not a single Primarch could ever breach it. And with that single statement, the greatest rivalry among the Primarchs was born. Perturabo flew into a rage, his insults so fierce that neither legion ever shared a battlefield together ever again, until they faced each other during the Horus Heresy. Even after the disappearance of Dorn, the respective gene-sons of both Primarchs would continue their feud for the coming 10,000 years. Yet with the announcement of Perturabo's return to the galaxy, the Lord of Iron has become an unstoppable force. World after world will fall if he is not stopped. Yet who in the Imperium can truly stop such an atrocity other than the Praetorian of Terra? Where is Rogal Dorn? What has truly happened to him? And more importantly, if he were to return, what would he be like? A warrior like the Black Templars, a tactician like the Crimson Fist, or a wall defender like the Imperial Fist? Well, to start out, let's take a look at his disappearance and why his personality will be very different from the Horus Heresy era Dorn that most people know. Dorn was one of the last Primarchs to disappear from Imperial records, perhaps even the very last. We can place the disappearance of Rogal Dorn at the tail end of M31. In the short story Egdin Oath, we learn that it has almost been 900 years since the Horus Heresy ended, and that 40 years ago, Rogal Dorn and the High Lords of Terra agreed to create a third founding of Space Marine chapters. This means that Dorn was active as late as 874 M31, which sadly means that he outlived Sigismund, who died during the First Black Crusade, which happened almost 200 years before this short story. The circumstances surrounding Dorn's disappearance are linked to a Black Crusade. According to various sources, the Cadian Gate was at risk of another attack, but it was not properly prepared for a full defense. Most of the Imperial Fist chapter was occupied by the forces of Krafrold Ultway, so Dorn was left with only 3 strike cruisers, holding 3 Imperial Fist companies, making his way to the Palanos Belt to fight the heretic Astartes before they could make their move. The battle was brutal, but the Imperial Fist refused to let their heavy disadvantage in numbers deter them. Most, if not all, of the warriors who had joined the Primarch died during this battle. However, their sacrifice bought the Cadians, the Imperial Navy, and the remaining Imperial Fists enough time to regroup and launch a second counterattack. And here reports start to differ and get a lot of lore inconsistencies. All reports agree that here, during this battle, Rogal Dorn disappeared. The main issue, however, lies with what was recovered from him. Most sources, like Index Astartes 2 and all Space Marine codices, state that only a single hand from Dorn has been recovered, the rest of his body having simply disappeared. Deathwatch Rites of Battle, however, claims that the chief librarian of the Imperial Fist found Rogal Dorn in a similar state to the Emperor after his duel on the Vengeful Spirit, which, if you didn't know, is a brutalized corpse nearly unrecognizable as Dorn. This body was then recovered and brought back home. We will put a pin in this lore for now, but ultimately, this battle is the last recorded engagement of Rogal Dorn, and from this point onwards, he is no longer present in Imperial history. Alright, before we move on from this topic, is Rogal Dorn truly dead? You know, the actual theory part of this video. There are a bunch of tiny details we have to cover. As you all probably know, Conrad Curse, in his insane visions, claims to have seen the death of Rogal Dorn by 100 murderers' blades in a dark tunnel, the same way he saw the death of Sanguinius and predicted the fratricide of Ferrus Manus. Conrad's visions are further reinforced when he met Rogal Dorn, Lorgar and Fulgrim. He accurately predicted both Lorgar's and Fulgrim's fall to chaos, including what their demon form would look like. The Imperial Fist, however, still believe Rogal Dorn to be alive, and if he isn't, his stasis-locked skeletal hand still has a hand in every world liberated by the Phalanx. Now, it is hard to imagine a coherent story for how Rogal Dorn could have survived the Battle of Palanos, but hear me out. I think there is a red herring in the lore here that no other lore tuber has ever picked up on. In Index Astartes 2, it is stated that most of the Imperial Fists were shadowing the movements of the Eldar from Ultway, yet they also at some point disappeared, which allowed them to reinforce the Cadian Gate right after Dorn fell. The timeline of this sudden disappearance falls closely in line with the death or disappearance of Dorn. The Chaos forces were forced to regroup after their battle, which gave the Imperial Fist the right amount of time to find them and obliterate them. Now, isn't that just suspicious? The Eldar have always sought to work against the forces of Chaos above all others, with Ultway even aiding Cadia during the 13th Black Crusade. But I find it rather peculiar that even in this story, they were involved right as both multiple companies and Dorn appeared and disappeared. What if, and hear me out, Dorn was wounded during this battle? The Eldari helped the Imperial Fist strike at the right time, and as the Eldar realized that Dorn, one of the greatest warriors against Chaos of all time, was about to die, they stole him away and left a red herring for the Imperial Fist not to chase and obliterate them. And before you scream at me that Dorn wouldn't work with Xenos, don't forget, Eldrad Ultran used to be friends with the Emperor and helped the creation of the Imperium of Man in more ways than one. And seeing as Eldrad is from Craftworld Ultway, there may be more seers who would love to help the Imperium in their strange Eldari ways. Oh, and I almost forgot, Eldrad straight up helps Roboute Guilliman in the Dark Imperium trilogy. The chances of Ultway saving Dorn for strange reasons has over 4 sources to back it up. Wait a second, Eldrad talked to Fulgrim to deter him from Chaos and save the Imperium. Eldrad helped Guilliman with his return. Ultway pushed the Imperial Fist to defend Cadia. Ultway Eldari were friends with the Emperor before he even made the Space Marines. And Dorn isn't supposed to know anything about the warp. Was this planned? There's something going on here, but I'll need to do a whole new video on that in the future. Let me know down in the comment section below if you'd like to hear my crazy theory on Craftworld Ultway. Alright, conspiracy theory side rant over. Let's take a look at if Dorn were to come back. What would he think of the Imperium? Could he even help us in the first place? When it comes to a yet-to-return Primarch's reaction to the Imperium, we often find ourselves purely theorizing. Yet in the case of Rogal Dorn, there is more information on this subject than you would expect. Aboard the Phalanx, there is the Scriptum Ascenda, which is guarded by the Heralds of the Truth, better known as the Fifth Company. The Scriptum Ascenda holds Dorn's commentary on the Great Crusade, heresy and scouring. It is a mighty collection of knowledge and insight into Rogal Dorn. Traditionally, only the Fifth Company captain, chaplains, librarians and trusted individuals of the Fifth Company are allowed to enter and read it. Yet, when Dravastis Fane first came to read the scriptum, he was struck by a revelation. The captain was so shocked by what he learned that he immediately brought what he found to the then chapter master Vorn Hagen. Hagen himself once commanded the Fifth Company as well, and together they set out to try and confirm what Fane had discovered. Apparently, Dorn feared that the corrupting tendrils of chaos had burrowed far deeper into the Imperium than anyone suspected. He spoke of a pattern that even now, 10 millennia later, was unfolding. Captain Fane and Chapter Master Hagen wanted to work on fully uncovering Dorn's concerns, yet war would stop that. The fall of Cadia would even see the Scriptum Ascenda suffer damage, which resulted in many of the important entries of Dorn being lost. Ever since, Captain Fane became obsessed with proving his revelation to be true. He has traveled all over the galaxy in the pursuit of knowledge. What this strange revelation tells us is that Dorn might be the Primarch best suited for a changed Imperium. Even besides all of this, Rogal Dorn had to live in an age where the Emperor was declared a god and the Primarchs were being worshipped as demigods. And what was Rogal Dorn's reaction to this? Did the Praetorian of Terra go on a crusade against fate? The answer might surprise you, as Dorn only argued that the Primarchs were not worthy of being worshipped alongside the Emperor because they had failed to protect him. Does this mean Rogal Dorn will follow the Black Templars in worshipping his father as a god? The answer is probably no, but he more than likely holds similar views to the modern day Astartes on this subject, rather than holding to the Imperial truth. Rogal Dorn also has a rather unique relationship with the High Lords of Terra. Due to their chapter fortress being the Phalanx, Dorn and his chapter were very responsive to calls for help from the Imperium. Dorn even built up a lot of goodwill with other institutions of the Imperium, as he preferred to help them over his brothers. While not outright stated, it seems as though Rogal Dorn has indeed grown colder and even more distant from his brothers. Yet it should also be made clear that Rogal Dorn was left broken. He blamed himself for the death of the Emperor. He nearly sundered the Imperium in another civil war when he refused the Codex Astartes. He failed to drag Perturabo to Terra in an iron cage. Chaos corruption was festering, and the Imperium was no longer the same entity he helped build. During the Scouring, it is even said Dorn wore mourning black armor while he raged across traitor fortresses. The Scouring novel series will definitely have a lot of stories to explore with Rogal Dorn, and perhaps he might indeed become very close to what Sigismund was. The question of whether the Imperium needs Rogal Dorn has a rather straightforward answer. Yet I would like to ask a question before we answer the other one. Who needs Rogal Dorn the most? The Imperium could do a lot better with a third Primarch, especially one capable of 1v1ing Perturabo. Yet which chapter should the Praetorian choose to lead? The Imperial Fists have many successor chapters, and their main chapter isn't even the Imperial Fist anymore. But which of these would Dorn lead himself if he were to return? We know Guilliman has shown favor to some of his successors, like the Silver Skulls, Emperor's Sights, or the Doom Eagles, to name but a few. Lionel Johnson, on the other hand, has chosen to use his forest walking ability to join any of his sons when they need him the most. We might even see Dorn choose to favor the Crimson Fists or Black Templars over the rest of his sons. While the lore I have covered previously gives a lot of credit to the Black Templars, I want to actually argue for the Crimson Fists instead. I would almost even say that Robute Guilliman supports this idea when he spoke to Pedro Cantor, as seen in the 8th edition Space Marine Codex. In the aftermath of the battles upon Rin's world, Pedro Cantor had much to do. The demons had brought ruin to much of the planet. The chapter, so painstakingly rebuilt, was once more decimated. And with Primaris reinforcement from Archmagel's call, there were entire new companies of Crimson Fists that had never known Rin's world or the chapter's rituals. As in all of the Ultramarines Primarch as Cantor was, the chapter master of the Crimson Fist was simply too overstretched to do more than thank the Lord Commander of the Imperium for his timely arrival. Pressed for time, Guilliman spent but 3 days on Rin's world as his crusade refitted itself. Before he left, Guilliman summoned Pedro Cantor. Arriving late and still in the same uncleansed battle garb, the Crimson Fist chapter master felt trepidation as he stood before the Primarch. Guilliman, who did not miss much, instantly read Cantor's discomfort. For the first time in months, the Primarch laughed, not in spite, but mirth. "Be at ease, Chapter Master. I have not summoned you for censure, but to speak earnestly. Rogal Dorn thought there was no higher purpose to the existence of the Astartes than the unification of mankind. I see that in you also, and his determination. I, need men who fight bravely even when faced with great tragedy. I have seen with my own eyes in recent days how you inspire intense loyalty in those around you, and I see you hold duty above glory or vengeance. My brother will be proud. Reassemble your chapter, Pedro Cantor, and look now to the future rather than the past. The Loki system and the Imperium entire has need of you." Such high praise is truly befitting the legendary Pedro Cantor. I would love to hear what you guys think of this. Would you guys think that Dorn would rather lead the Black Templars, Imperial Fists, or Crimson Fists? So, will Dorn return to fight Perturabo? Honestly, we don't really know. So far, it is very likely Dorn is dead and will not return. Yet last year, we would have said the same thing about Commissar Yarrick. Now, I do have to put in a big disclaimer. If you're familiar with 40k lore, then you probably have visited Lexicanum and read some of their articles. Now, I do not want to insult or put down Lexicanum, since they are a pretty good source for lore and a good way to get a basic grasp of the setting. They do make some mistakes. In their Rogal Dorn article, they mention some lore inconsistencies, and I would like to talk about that. Lexicanum says that Dorn was last active 100 years after the second founding, but after reading the same story, which is the Igaden Oath, it seems that they just made up the lore. I have covered the details of the Agaden Oath to use it to try to figure out when Rogal Dorn roughly disappeared. Lexicanum does, however, correctly point out some inconsistencies with Dorn's lore. And after reading these sources myself, that is in fact true. There is some confusing language involved about whether the Black Crusade he fought in already reached Cadia or not, and this is different based on the source. Another minor issue is that in Index Astartes 2, it said Dorn disappeared shortly after Corax, but also said Dorn was around as one of the last Primarchs. This could still be true if we didn't know Corax disappeared very soon after the Scouring and second founding, which I talk about more in my video about when each loyalist Primarch disappeared. Now, the biggest issue of all, do the Imperial Fists have Dorn's corpse or only his hand? Well, in 1993, the novel Space Marine by Ian Watson tells us that the Imperial Fists have the corpse of Dorn. Then, in Index Astartes, it is said only the hand remains, and then in Deathwatch Rites of Battle, it goes back to the corpse. But then most Space Marine codices only talk about the hand. So, let's make this clear. This section of 40k lore is full of contradictions. If you want to check this out for yourself, I highly recommend the sources I have used in this video. Before ending this lore deep dive, I want to doubly reinforce this. Lexicanum is a fan site, and they put great work into their wiki article. tutorials. They are great for getting the basics of 40k, but do not treat them as a direct source. The same honestly goes for me and everyone else who does a lore video. At the end of the day, we are all human. We can all make mistakes, but above all, Warhammer 40k is a hobby to be shared and enjoyed. So please don't go harassing people or be rude to someone because they made a mistake in the lore. Hell, even the official 40k writers misremember the lore at times. As a past licensed pharmacist myself, let me tell you, I'd rather have a 40k fan or writer forget the lore, rather than things where accuracy actually matters. It is a dark fantasy in space, not law or mad science. Just like how half this video is theory yet based on sources, it'll only be canon or correct once a new Dorn miniature is released. Until then, it is subject to change to the whims of Games Workshop stock price and miniature sales. If anybody tries to tell you anything else, they genuinely just do not understand the hobby. I hate to be a breaker of bad news, but that's just how it's worked for the last 30 years. Anyway, side rants aside, that's enough about Dorn. What do you think about all of this? Do you believe that Dorn is alive and was rescued by the Eldari from Craftworld Ultway? Or do you think he's actually dead, and that Perturabo is gonna be stopped by Guilliman or the Lion instead? Let me know your comments, concerns, suggestions, theories and ideas down in the comment section below. If you think I deserved it with this video, please leave a like and hit that subscribe button. It helps push this video into the algorithm and it would make me very happy. Thank you for watching and I'll be seeing you guys in the next one. Bye bye.